Okay, so today I want to start where, in my experience, every great talk starts, which is with a really sad story about fishing. So in college, I took a fly fishing class, and for months we learned about watershed ecology. We practiced tying those little lures in the laboratory, and we practiced casting in the gymnasium. Now, somehow I got an A in the class, but I did not once go fishing. I have no idea how. So if college is supposed to teach a man to fish, it taught me how to pretend to fish. So I bring up this story because I think it's a good example of what are the four great problems in education. The problem of economics asks, why did my half a semester fly fishing class cost $2,000? And more broadly, how do we improve the affordability of education, lower the costs, but hold on to a high quality of instruction? The question of community asks, why were we stuck on campus in the gymnasium? Why don't we go off into the real world and actually fish? How do our schools provide us with genuine experiences in real places, where students are actually authentic residents and not relegated to being second-class citizens who just pretend and play at life? The problem of pedagogy, of our way of teaching and our way of learning, asks, how do we teach the complexity of whole subjects, even a subject like fishing, all at once? How do we teach its art, its science, its culture, its history, and its technique? And most importantly, within that, how do we reconcile theory with practice? The problem of technology, lastly, asks, how do we use technology to liberate us from the classroom? How do we get it to humanize the learning experience so that I'm not stuck in the basement of the biology building watching videos of other people fishing and watching Robert Redford's great acting in The River Runs Through It? So I want to begin where I began with my work at the Saxifrad School, with this problem of economics. In my parents' generation, in the 1970s, they didn't have to deal with this number: $1.2 trillion in student debt that we've incurred since then. The reason being, the cost of college has pretty much tripled since the 1970s. So to do something about this figure, and thinking really hard about the economic culture of college in the future, I think that we need to take a step back and really think about a set of economic disciplines that we take forward as we restructure and redevelop what college looks like. So I want to put out a few of these principles. The first of them is simplify the transaction as much as possible. Right now, colleges are really good at doing everything for their students and making things pretty complicated. But what if we simplify the administrative model? What if we simplify the campus? What if we even did sort of sacrificial, crazy, humble things like not having students' tuition money go into the college bank account if it doesn't have to? What if students could pay their teachers directly? Simplify the transaction. The second principle is to never build what the community can provide. Again, right now, our colleges are good at doing everything for students. But at the Saxifrad School, we started to operate what we call a nomadic campus. We don't own or lease any of our own spaces, but instead we rely on partnerships in the neighborhood. In a 1-mile square radius of where we operate, there's hundreds of places that are really underutilized. This is true of every city in the world, especially cities like Pittsburgh. Right now, we've only tapped into about 8 of these locations. We've only scratched the surface. And we've taught 200 students in these 8 locations. Imagine what it would look like to have a network of nomadic learning opportunities across and integrated into a neighborhood. The third point is to offer an education, but not everything. Again, colleges are great at providing everything for their students, a lot of really good things. But we could save a lot of money and maybe offer a more genuine experience if we didn't offer infinite free ice cream in the cafeteria. And if we said, well, maybe instead of building a state-of-the-art climbing wall and exercise facility, what if you just went and joined the YMCA? What would happen if students became economically dependent on their communities? Our thought is that maybe what would happen is that students would become invested in the future of their places and reconnect with the authentic diversity of their communities. The last point, I think, is the most important, and that is to engage students with proactive transparency. Right now, by omission, every college in the country is lying to their students. They're lying by using this word tuition, which literally means payment for instruction. But they're using the word to talk about a lot of things which are actually payment to be marketed to, or payment for building maintenance, or payment to build the new sports complex. If the economic culture of colleges is to move forward, they need to take a step back and really be open and honest with students and their parents about what their money is actually going towards. On the front page, give them a breakdown of expenses so that they can be thoughtful consumers and customers of their education. So for us, this problem of economics is closely tied to the problem of the community. Again, I said at the Saxifrad School, this nomadic campus model forces us to rely on mutually beneficial and very healthy partnerships with the community. But if you look back at the history of college, it's littered with really sort of sad stories about tenuous and difficult relationships between colleges and their hometowns. Even here in Pittsburgh, you look back at our recent mayor. He got into a bit of a dispute with the local colleges and tried to tax them, despite them being tax-exempt nonprofits. Also in Pittsburgh, we recently held the International Summit for Higher Education Reform. At the summit, the college leaders from around the world got together to talk about this timely and important issue of community engagement. But unfortunately, in that conversation was this implicit assumption that the college is separate from the non-college community, and that in order to engage, they have to come out from their isolation and go into the neighborhood. This is problematic and difficult, and I hope in the future of college, in my program and everyone in the world, that the college and non-college communities start to become one and the same. At the Saxifrad School, what this looks like is that our carpentry students meet underneath of the ladies' Zumba workouts. And they meet on the same night as juggling club, and sometimes go juggle after class. Our agriculture students meet at a local urban farm partner location and help to grow food for their neighbors, while future web developers learn to code in a coffee shop after hours. So I think that this importance of the idea of community is really important, not just because it saves students a lot of money, which it can, but because of a more personal value. And that value is it gives students a real context for their learning, so that when they graduate, they're not going off into the real world because they've already been in it, living and working all along. We need to remember that as much as our schools can educate, so too can our communities. Colleges need to do everything they can to make sure they're not coddling students and to make sure that they enable them to live as authentic residents in authentic places. As Henry David Thoreau says, we must not play at life or study it merely, while the community supports us at this expensive game, but live life earnestly from beginning to end. Now, as much as Thoreau's quote is about our place in the community we call home, I think it's even more about our most difficult pedagogical conversation, about the conversation of the way that we teach and the way that we learn. Specifically, this divide that's throughout our culture, a division and a difficult balance between theory and practice. This plays itself out in the separation between the ivory tower and the trade school, white collar and blue collar, intellectual and worker, rich or poor, academic or non-academic, smart or non-smart, creative or uncreative, ideas or things, thinkers or makers, critics or doers, the work of imagination or the work of production, the choice of going to college to study art or to study petroleum engineering. Now, this conversation has been happening over the last 10 years, and there's been a lot of people who have done some really great work thinking about revaluing the work of the trades. You know, the maker, DIY, hacker type movement. But I think, unfortunately, this conversation is still stuck in the either-or dualistic rhetoric of the past. We have one camp really valuing the work of making, and another sort of desperately clinging to the value of the humanities. This brings me back to the poem where the name of the Saxifrad School comes from. William Carlos Williams writes, "Through metaphor to reconcile the people and the stones, compose, no ideas but in things invent, saxifrage is my flower that splits the rocks. Compose, no ideas but in things invent. Compose and invent." But too often right now, the conversation is either one or the other. Now, William Carlos Williams, interestingly, was not just a poet, one of the most important poets of the last century, but he was also a full-time doctor. And he knew that to be a poet, to do this work of reconciling ideas with things, that work was one of necessity. He could not be a doctor unless he was a poet. And he knew he would have no grounding and substance for his poetry unless he was also a doctor. In the United States, we're great at production. We build the most and the biggest houses of any country in the world, and we grow an impressive amount of food. But our poor food culture, our poor inquiry around food, has resulted in us leading the world in diet-related illness. And our unthoughtful and unethical housing industry helped to kick off a global financial crisis. So we can't afford to just be good at production, just as we can't afford to only be good at inquiry. The work of education and the work of our lives needs to be a productive inquiry, one where students are learning both to make what's valuable and to question the value of what is made. The farmer poet Wendell Berry says that beside every effort of making, which is necessarily narrow, there must be an effort of judgment and of criticism, which must be as broad as possible. These two problems, how to make and how to judge, are the business of education. Now, the problem of pedagogy, I think, finds its counterpart very closely in the problem of technology. This is the word technology spelled out in binary code. Now, bring up this problem of technology because I think that this year in education, this is sort of the turning point where the conversation about the future of educational technology is really going to be formed. And we're excited because over the last couple years, we've just begun to recognize that in tech, we need to ask this question. It says, because all technology has the equal capacity to both create and destroy, we need to compose for it a great purpose, and recognizing that our work of invention is only half of the future. And over the last couple of years, you may have noticed, the conversation about EdTech has been really caught up in discussing the massive open online course. But now we think that the conversation around the MOOC has really had its hype cycle run full circle. And we're just beginning to have some exciting and realistic conversations about the future of EdTech. So what does that future look like? I think that it's exciting to consider a complex network of open, inspired, excellent learning resources. But we need to recognize that at their core, they're just an opportunity to learn. They're just a resource. In that way, they're not so different from the libraries of old. And with those libraries of old, we have this sort of story about Goodwill Hunting, right? Where you don't need to go to Harvard. You can just get a Harvard quality education for $1.50 in library fines. But that doesn't happen very often. We need to remember that no matter how great our technological platforms are, they lack the ability to inspire, give application, context, mentorship, place, inspiration. Right now, the creators to the game Minecraft, think infinite pixelated Legos on a digital platform. They have this script to the trailer to the game that says that Minecraft is the most important sandbox that you'll ever set foot in. And while Minecraft is pretty awesome, I think that it's troubling to think that, building the Game of Thrones world or any other world you want in Minecraft or World of Warcraft or SimCity is more important than getting caught up in the actual craft of building the world we live in. I think that this is why we love Harry Potter's Hogwarts so much. It's because Harry and his friends are part of this actual craft, right? They're saving the world, they're learning to train dragons and grow plants and defend their lives. And whenever their teachers get in the way of this, whenever their teachers say, oh, no, you don't need to actually do that, just pretend, just learn from books, they rebel and they start a secret society to continue their learning behind the walls of the school. And they do this because they know they have to keep learning. They have to go to the library, to the restricted section after hours, because if they don't, they're going to die. The lives of their friends and their own lives depend on what they learn. And they know that they're the ones who are going to build the world, save the world, and ask the hard questions. And the most important thing is that they're not going to do it 10 years from now once they graduate. They're going to do it today. So that hard question brings me to my final point, which is a bit of an exercise. I want to read the script to the trailer to the game Minecraft. But I want you to imagine that this script is actually talking about the real world. I think it does talk about the real world. I think it needs to. I think the work of education has to make this script true about the real world. So I want everyone in the room to close your eyes. You can either nap or listen. But I want to read this and imagine I'm talking about the real world. Let's go to a place where everything is made of blocks, where the only limit is your imagination. Let's go wherever you want to go. Build anything you want, day or night, rain or shine, because this is the most significant sandbox you've ever set foot in. Build a majestic castle, invent a new machine, or take a ride on a roller coaster. Play with friends, build your own little community. No one can tell you what you can and cannot do, and with no rules to follow, this adventure, it's up to you. So open your eyes and imagine the world actually is made of blocks, right? Blocks that we can manipulate. And the work of education is really just to help us to understand those blocks and inspire us to build with them. So moving forward, colleges need to take a step back and ask this hard question. Are we preparing our graduates to build the world and ask hard questions, or are they just pretending to fish? Thanks.